So we're covering William Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. And normally this play is depicted as a nice, sweet romance. Romeo and Juliet fall in love, and gosh, it's sad that their families keep them apart. They can't express their true love. I don't think that's the way that the play should be read. Or I would suggest there's an alternate way of reading the play. And I want to frame the reading here using another play by Shakespeare, another poem by Shakespeare. This is one of his sonnets. Shakespeare was a realist, I think. He was not a romantic. He had no illusions about how beautiful and lovely and sweet human life could be. Most all of his plays and all of his writings have to do with the violence and the awfulness and the anxiety that people go through. He had an understanding of the angst of the human spirit. He also seemed to have little truck with lust and with uncontrolled action. And in play after play, we see that sort of activity gets people in trouble. That sort of unthought through action always gets people killed in his plays. So here in this sonnet, Sonnet 129, we see something of what Shakespeare thought about what he called lust, and how he saw lust as something very devastating to be avoided. Sonnet 129. The expense of spirit and a waste of shame is lust in action. And till action, lust is perjured, murderous, bloody, full of blame, savage, extreme, rude, cruel, not to trust. Enjoyed no sooner, but despised straight, past reason hunted, and no sooner had, past reason hated, than a swallowed bait on purpose laid to make the taker mad. Mad in pursuit, and in procession, so had, having, and in quest to have extreme, a bliss and proof, and proved a very woe. For a joy proposed, and behind a dream. All this the world well knows, yet none knows well to shun the heaven that leads men to this hell. So essentially, in reading through the play, Romeo suffers from this very quality of the expensive spirit. He is ungoverned. And I want to look at two things, just thinking about that, to kick this off. The first is when he first sees Juliet, a very famous scene called the balcony scene in Act 2, Scene 2. Here's the text. What soft, what light through yonder window breaks? It is the east, and Juliet is the sun. Arise, fair sun, and kill the envious moon, who is already sick and pale with grief, that thou, her maid, art far more fair than she. Be not her maid, since she is envious, her vestal livery is but sick and green, and none but fools do wear it. Cast it off. It is my lady. Oh, it is my love. Oh, that she knew she were. She speaks, and she says nothing. What of that? Her eye discourses. I will answer it. I'm too bold. 'Tis not to me she speaks. Two of the fairest stars in all the heaven, having some business, do entreat her eyes to twinkle in their spheres till they return. What if her eyes were there, they in her head? The brightness of her cheek would shame those stars. As daylight doth a lamp, her eyes in heaven would through the airy region stream so bright that birds would sing and think it were not night. See how she leans her cheek upon her hand. Oh, that I were a glove upon that hand, that I might touch that cheek. Now notice how that's normally read as being this nice, beautiful expression of love on the part of Romeo. But there's something first off to point out, that although it's a balcony scene, Juliet is above and Romeo's below, and that's how it's always played. So he's like looking up at his lady love, and she's exalted, and she's like the sun, he compares her to. And he uses metaphors like, for instance, like the moon is envious of her, and that her eyes shine forth. The brightness of her cheek is to be remarked on here. It says her eyes are in heaven. She's contending with the stars. The birds would sing and think it were not night if she appeared at nighttime. And at last he said, I prefer to be a glove on my hand. It was all very romantic and beautiful and sweet. Wouldn't some girl love to hear all that? Because it's quite delightful. But elsewhere, Shakespeare writes very realistically that real love is not this business. This is not real love. In one of his sonnets, he talks about how his love is not like the sun. Here's the sonnet. Sonnet 130. My mistress's eyes are nothing like the sun. Coral is far more red than her lips red. If snow be white, why then her breasts are dun. If hairs be wires, black wires grow on her head. I have seen roses damasked, red, and white, but no such roses see I in her cheeks. And in some perfumes is there more delight than in the breath that from my mistress reeks. I love to hear her speak, yet well I know that music hath a far more pleasing sound. I grant I never saw a goddess go. My mistress, when she walks, treads on the ground. And yet by heaven I think my love as rare as any she belied with false compare. Notice there how Shakespeare says, even though she's not like the sun, even though wires come out of her head and her breath reeks, still I love her. There's something about the human person, the quality of human life, that although it doesn't have these exalted qualities all the time, real love loves the person beyond all of that superficial business, beyond all that facade of the physical world, if you will. Shakespeare seems to express that real love doesn't alter or change when the accidents change, and that the real lover doesn't just look for these radiant hyperboles that Romeo seems to express in this speech. Because no woman actually is like the sun. No woman's face contends with the moon. There is no woman whose eyes shine forth, or whose discourses are such that you can see them in her eyes. That doesn't happen. Women are people. And a realist like Shakespeare sees women as human beings capable both of greatness or of great evil and great disaster and great foolishness. But to make them goddesses, the way Romeo does, is dangerous. And to exalt them to that level is to set yourself up for failure. Just like to say that all women are devils is to set yourself up for loneliness and disaster. Women are human. Men are human. And Romeo, as we see in this scene, is stuck in this world of hyperbole that he crafts with his own mind. He himself, in this soliloquy, he's talking to himself. He's not talking to Juliet. He's not saying to Juliet, you're like the sun. He's saying to himself, she's like the sun. And it's though he's almost convincing himself that this young girl, she couldn't be more than 14, that this young girl is the new sun in his world and his horizon. She has replaced the previous sun. Now, on the one hand, the balcony scene can be read as a very romantic sort of scene, but it's also to be noted that Juliet is getting ready for bed. She's put on her night clothes. Romeo's lurking in the dark, in the foliage, peering through her window. In our day and age, you get arrested for that kind of junk. That's stalking. And Romeo, in some ways, is stalking Juliet. It's as though Shakespeare is talking to us about what the nature of the stalker really is. He's trying to convince himself that here's this salvation in a woman, which actually doesn't exist. Well, if Juliet is replacing a previous son, who is that previous son? And that takes us back to the first part of the play. And this is all the way back, Act 1, Scene 2. And in Act 1, Scene 2, Romeo and his friend Benvolio have encountered a servant who's carrying a guest list for a party, and the servant can't read. And so he asks Romeo to read the guest list, and by accident, Romeo happens to see the name of the girl that he currently loves. Here's the text. God give God an eye, praise sir, can you read? Aye, mine own fortune in my misery, says Romeo. Perhaps you have learned it with that book, but I pray can you read anything you see? Aye, if I know the letters and the language. You say honestly, rest you merry. Stay, fellow, I can read. Signor Martino and his wife and daughters, County Anselm and his beauteous sisters, the lady widow of Vitruvio, Signor Placencio and his lovely nieces, Mercutio and his brother Valentine, my uncle Capulet, his wife and daughters, my fair niece Rosaline, Livia, Signor Valentia, cousin Tybalt, Lucia, lovely Helena. A fair assembly, whither should they come? Up. Whither to supper? To our house. Whose house? My master's. Indeed, I should have asked you that before. Now, I'll tell you without asking. My master is a great rich Capulet, and if you be not to the house of Montagues, I pray come and crush a cup of wine. Rest you merry. At this same ancient feast of Capulets, says Benvolio, sups the fair Rosalind, whom thou so lovest, with all the admired beauties of Verona. Go thither, and with unattainted eye compare her face with some that I shall show, and I will make thee think thy swan a crow. Notice that it's Rosalind that he loves at the beginning of the play. He's never seen Juliet. He doesn't love Juliet at the beginning of the play. He loves Rosalind. As Benvolio says, come with me to the party, and I will show you other girls that you can compare to Rosalind and see if they aren't equally beautiful. With unattainted eye, compare her face with some that I shall show, and I will make thee think thy swan a crow. What Benvolio is also saying is, if you can't make it with Rosalind, maybe you'll find another girl who is equally gorgeous that you could make it with. And this takes us back even earlier in the play to Act 1, Scene 2, right at the very end. And Benvolio says this to Romeo. He says, be ruled by me, forget to think of her. And Romeo says, oh, teach me how I should forget to think. And Benvolio says, by giving liberty unto thine eyes, examine other beauties. In other words, look for other women. If that one doesn't suit, find others. They're more beautiful women. There are more fish in the sea. So you will learn to forget the woman that you currently are in love with by seeing other girls. Here's a sticker, because we say love. Shakespeare says love. But there's indication that it's not love. So when first we see Romeo, we see him through the eyes of other people. Montague, the father of Romeo, says, where's my son? And Benvolio says, well, he's hanging out under that tree. Saw him this morning there. And Montague says, he hangs out there a lot. It says, many a morning hath he there been seen, with tears augmenting the fresh morning's dew, adding to clouds more clouds with his deep sighs. And further on, away from light steals home my heavy son, and private in his chamber pens himself, shuts up his windows, locks fair daylight out, and makes himself an artificial night. So basically, Romeo is hanging out under trees, weeping and crying and beating his breast. and he's locking himself in his room and hanging out in the dark. And he's kind of a goth sort of character, moody, brooding, typical teenage boy. What teenage boy has not hid himself away from his parents and wept and moaned and beat his breast? Sort of a wimpy kind of character, but nevertheless, that's what he is at the beginning, apparently. And we find out then that part of the cause, Benvolio says, "Do you know the cause?" And Montague says, "I don't know what the cause is. Kids these days." But then we find out when Benvolio confronts Romeo that the cause is this Rosalind character, this girl that Romeo is pining for. Well, why is he pining? As he says there in Act 1, Scene 1, he says, "What sadness lengthens Romeo's hours?" Benvolio asks. And Romeo says, "Not having that which, having, makes him short." So he's pining because he can't have Rosalind. Or we could say, it's romantic. He's pining for this girl who won't fall in love with him, right? And so we sympathize because we say, oh, who hasn't pined for somebody before? Then further on in the text, Romeo says, "I have lost myself. I am not here. This is not Romeo. He's some other where." In other words, this pining has made me split from myself. I don't know who I am anymore, that I am outside of myself. So again, sympathetic because we think, who hasn't been in love before? And who hasn't felt this splitting apart and this I don't even know who I am anymore business that occurs when our heart aches? It's true. It's very sympathetic. Romeo even calls himself a sick man in sadness, makes his will. But then Romeo says to Benvolio this interesting phrase, and the text it can be read one of two ways. Either it's read as the shafts hitting the heart of this girl Rosalind and it hasn't happened and therefore she's not in love, or it can be read in a double entendre way. And Shakespeare's audience was not afraid of this sort of thing. They saw it all the time. If it's read in a double entendre way, that is, a sexual way, it takes on a different meaning. Here's the text. "She'll not be hit with Cupid's arrow. She hath Dian's wit, and in strong proof of chastity well armed. From love's weak, childish bow she lives unharmed. She will not stay the siege of loving terms, nor bide the encounter of assailing eyes, nor ope her lap to saint-seducing gold." Now, on the one hand, if it's Cupid's arrow that's hitting her, that hits in the heart, right? She has Diana's wit and is like Diana. The goddess Diana was a goddess who had no sexual relations with men. Of chastity, Rosalind is well armed. And from love's weak, childish bow, she lives unharmed. She's never fallen in love, Diana, Rosalind, and she will not endure the besieging of her to fall in love with Romeo. Romeo's tried, but she won't do it. But Romeo also says she will not bide the encounter of assailing eyes, nor open her lap to saint-seducing gold. And that's interesting, because what he's really pining for here, it seems, is not just her affections, romantically speaking. It's her affections, physically speaking. That Rosalind won't consummate a physical relationship with Romeo. Romeo wants the physical relationship. In other words, lust, not love, lust. And Benvolio says, "Then she hath sworn that she will still live chaste." "She hath," says Romeo, "and in that sparing makes huge waste." In other words, she won't go to bed with me. And that's a terrible waste that she won't. And I'm pining over the fact that I can't get her to consummate a physical relationship. So what we see at the beginning is Romeo is this brooding, moody teenager. And that's sympathetic, certainly. And we see in the beginning that he's not stupid. He certainly recognizes the violence around him. But that's not his major concern. His major concern is he wants to consummate a physical relationship with a beautiful girl. Rosalind won't consummate this physical relationship. So Benvolio and Romeo go to this party in order to find another girl, equally beautiful, who might consummate a physical relationship, who might get physical with Romeo. And who's that girl? It's the younger, easily by 3 years younger, cousin of Rosalind, Juliet. And you got to ask the question, how would that be received in the audience of Shakespeare, and how is that received for us? We certainly sympathize with the idea that Romeo wants love, and we all want love, and that's a source of heartache. But Shakespeare's not talking about just the heartache. What he's talking about, I think, is this ungoverned lust, this ungoverned sexual desire that doesn't want to see beyond the physical, that wants to consummate physical love without going to the self-governance and control and self-denial necessary for real love. The danger in that, Shakespeare seems to suggest, is that gets people killed. The tragedy of Romeo and Juliet is not that their families keep them apart, but that their families can't keep them apart. Given what Romeo desires, which is this ungoverned, law-breaking, rule-defying sexual love, there is no other end to the play but that everybody dies. The next question to ask would be, why is Juliet foolish enough to fall for such a masher? Yeah, he's deep, and he's good looking, and he's wealthy. But if she's a smart girl, if she's a rational girl, she doesn't seem to be driven by lust in this play. She's driven by something else. Why does she agree to the romance? That's a question for another time.